When I was a little kid, I would get in trouble for one word. Why?
What type of a kid were you growing up?
I was definitely a nerd.
You deserve to be here.
And here deserves you to be, yeah.
Do you think people are becoming lazy to think?
Wow, interesting. The true experts in a topic often feel uninformed, and people who know very little think that they know a lot.
What is your process like of creating an argument?
Like, I think if you can write clearly, it means you're thinking clearly. If I had to summarize my message into one sentence, is that sentence clear to me?
What has been one of the most challenging experiences or moments in your life?
My years at university, I was finding it hard to motivate myself and to kind of find purpose and connection. If you follow the whys long enough, you're going to end up at something philosophical.
Most of your time seems to be in reading and in writing. Should we be expecting a book from you anytime soon?
That's a great question, man.
Awesome. So how have you been?
Yeah, I've been well. It has been an interesting couple of weeks, I guess. Things are a bit of a roller coaster, but overall positive. Overall positive.
That's good to hear. And well, congratulations on your
Thank
appointment.
you very much, Renatus. I appreciate that.
I
Yeah,
remember I
thank you.
remember the other time I was on campus and we were speaking.
Yes,
Well, you
yes.
actually had different plans. So how did that turn out?
Yeah, I remember we were in the dining hall. We were having lunch, and you asked me what my long-term, medium-term plans were, and I was sharing that it was my intention to be in the dean's role for one more year. I think I don't know how much more I shared with you guys, but I was talking about going back to school, potentially doing a career change. Um, yeah, I mean, I think sometimes you make plans for life, and sometimes life makes plans for you. And a need came along, and the governance of ALA saw fit to ask me to step in to help address that need, and I'm going with it to see what happens, and to try and do my best to serve an institution that has done a lot for me and that I care a lot about.
And can you tell me when was the first time you joined ALA and what made you join ALA?
Yeah, sure. ALA was my first job after university in 2009. So I was finishing my undergraduate studies. I'd studied politics as my major and philosophy as my minor. I thought I was going to go to law school, but I had not had a particularly good college experience, and I was looking to do something a little bit different for a while and kind of recalibrate, I guess. And um, my roommate at the time, my housemate, flatmate, forwarded me an email about this new school that had opened in South Africa and had this Pan-African vision, and it wanted to recruit some teaching fellows to come and live on campus with the students and teach some classes and help create the institution. So I applied for that role, and after a very long recruitment process, I was offered the position, and I came here.
Seems like ALA has a really recruitment. I mean, a really long recruitment process, and I think I think it was the same with the previous CEO, because it was
Yeah,
6 months, I believe. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. That
yeah. You know, I think it is. I don't think it should. I don't think it should be that way, frankly. Like I think it's important to run a rigorous recruitment process. I think it's important to think of recruitment processes as a two-way kind of mutual selection process, right? Like you need to find out enough as much as you can about a candidate to predict their success in the opportunity or position that you're recruiting for. And the process should give the candidate enough information to self-select in or out of this thing. And at the end of it, hopefully it's mutually beneficial. But in my experience, some of the best processes we've run have been rigorous, but focused and fast. Like I think you can in 6, 8, 10 weeks really run a solid process for a senior leadership position. Yeah, so I think ALA tends to drag things out, but I don't think that's a strength necessarily.
I mean, why do you think they drag things up?
I mean, I do just I'll distinguish a little bit between the student experience and the staff faculty experience. I think, on the student experience, realistically, it's like you're talking about a larger volume process. You want to have big windows. You want to allow students to start and end, their applications within a relatively big window, so that people who are just finding out about it, they have time to make that decision with their families, and so that your recruitment team has time to generate the best possible pool of applicants. So I think that it can be feel long from the student side by design. But even if it feels long, then maybe there are ways to keep applicants engaged during the process and keep them feeling like they're getting value out of the process. On the staff side, I think that it's when you are in a fast-paced work environment, and at ALA, I think we have a tendency often to bite off more than we can chew because we have this ambitious vision. When you're in a fast-paced work environment, it's easy to make the mistake of prioritizing the stuff that's right in front of you and deprioritizing things that are, they're abstract. So 3 people come to you with problems that are right now kind of problems, which makes it hard to justify postponing their right now problem to plan your recruitment process, to prepare the JD, to prepare the assignments, to review the CVs. And you just have to be disciplined about prioritizing the process that's going to bring in the talent that ultimately people drive the results, right? So if you can invest the time in recruiting the right people, then you have less of those urgent fires to deal with, if that makes sense. So I think that can be, I'm sure it's common, but that's certainly, in my observation, has been one of the ways that I've screwed up, and let recruitment kind of last for too long.
But I think, well, it makes some sense for it to last for too long because, well, I mean, the people that you work with in a huge way influence the success or the failure of, if it's an institution or a venture or a business. And speaking
Mm-hmm.
about business wise, right? I was reading a book called Build to Last, and there's
Mm.
how some of the most successful companies over the years have learned to look inwards and give names to
Mm.
individuals who have been in their companies. And yeah, so
Mm.
what role do you think that might play in organizations such as the African Leadership Academy?
Yeah, I mean that's yeah. I think it's crucial. I think it's crucial. The first, like, I want to affirm the first thing you said, which is like, uh, people, human beings, individuals, especially in an organization like ALA, where our core business is development, or human development, right? Teaching, learning, talent identification, leadership development. It's all about people. But in general, in an enterprise, in an institution, the biggest driver of results and of success is your team. So investing in that makes a lot of sense. There'll be returns on that investment. Then over time, as you grow as an organization, become more complex as an organization, if you are growing people day to day, week to week, month to month, through good feedback, through development opportunities, through new challenges, through scaffolding, through exposure, then there should be internal progression opportunities, right? People should be able to progress within the institution. And that's like 100% been my personal journey, right? I started as ALA as a teaching fellow, and I've just continuously had opportunities to take on more, being challenged to grow. And I've been grateful to work with a lot of colleagues who've had similar journeys, right? I think about Ms. Mandisa, Ms. Nicole, Ms. Lisa, Mr. Mopati. These are all people who've progressed internally within the diploma program, within the school, right? Mr. Mopati had a very similar trajectory to me, teaching fellow, faculty member, head of department, now director of teaching and learning. And I think that's a great way to develop people who really understand the story institutional memory of the organization, and they can carry the culture, and they can symbolize, right, to others what ALA can be as a workplace and a professional development opportunity. All of that being said, I also think there should be a healthy balance of looking outwards, right? I think my rule when hiring, especially when hiring for senior roles, is even if I have a strong feeling about an internal candidate, almost always, with one exception that I can think of, almost always, I've opened the process to external candidates because I want to know, and I want the internal candidate to know that they were selected because they're ready for the job, not because they have a good relationship with me.
Oh, that's nice. So you're giving people the roles because they qualify for them and not because they've been in the academic institution for a long time. And
Yeah, you shouldn't progress because like I've been here for 5 years. I need to, I should progress. No, I've been here for 5 years and I've learned during those 5 years and I've demonstrated my impact in these ways. And this opportunity is available to me. And the other thing that I think about that isn't a, not everyone of my peers shares this opinion, but ultimately any organization is only so big. And if you have a colleague or a team member or report who has has a strong trajectory, they've grown a lot, they've developed a lot, and there isn't an opportunity for them to take the next step internal to the organization, I feel a responsibility towards that person to be like, okay, cool, let's start looking for where your next step should be. And sometimes the next step is somewhere else.
so no matter how productive people are in the organization, there are times that you are willing to let them go so that they can grow.
I think that's what you owe people, right? Like, I think you should try really hard to keep them. You should try really hard to find the next step for them internally, and you should be willing to think creatively. But I also think like, I think about someone who left last year after being at ALA for 7 years, and like I think it's a way of honoring your relationship with the individual to be like, you know what, like I think you're ready for bigger things, and there aren't bigger things available here. So how can I help you plan your next step? And ultimately, that's the kind of relationship that over time, that's someone who could come back, right? When the right opportunity becomes available.
Most organizations usually like to hold people back and they wouldn't want to let them
Mm.
go. So I think that's a good perspective. So
Hmm.
when you started working at ALA as a teaching fellow, have you always been teaching African philosophy, or did you start with a different?
No, yeah. When I first taught at ALA, I taught the year one, mainly in the year one's curriculum, which has changed quite a bit since then. And then very briefly in my third year, I taught a year two class on conflict and human rights. So
Conflict and
philosophy
human rights?
yeah, philosophy is a newer thing, I guess.
Did you play a role in bringing that into the institution?
No, there was already a course. Someone had developed it. Actually, an alum had come back, and she had created this year two elective in African philosophy. And then when I came back, it must have been the year or two before I came back. So when I came back in 2016, the course existed, but no one was teaching it, and I taught in year one for a while. And then my second year as dean, the head of African studies at the time, Lisa, was like, "Hey, there's this African philosophy course. I know you're interested in philosophy. You want to consider teaching that?" So then I took that on instead of the year one course, and I've never looked back since.
It was one of my best classes at the academy. Well, and it
I'm glad to hear that. I'm
I
glad
mean,
to
we
hear
had
that.
we had lots of readings and we were introduced to a lot of African philosophers, which is quite fascinating
Mm-hmm.
because most of the times we only learn about Western philosophers, and if you want to learn, it's Western philosophers. So I think for me it was good being able to learn about African philosophers and having a conversation and sitting down with you and Sophia, who was also our teacher. It was really interesting, and I really enjoyed every single conversation we had.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that, and I hope you've continued to explore and read a little bit from time to time.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, I have to do better, but I mean, I'm doing something about it.
Good,
What
good.
role do you think philosophers play in the communities?
What they do play or what they should play?
Well, so what do they play right now, and what should they be playing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting. My sense is there are very few contemporary philosophers who are having a direct impact on society. I think by and large, the people who view themselves as professional philosophers or as academic philosophers are reaching a relatively limited audience. Maybe that has always been true. Maybe the idea of a publicly consumed or respected or perceived philosopher is a romantic one. But I think that maybe I'll split my answer into two pieces. I think that ultimately philosophers are trying to make sense of the world, make sense of human experience, and use that to, in some cases, guide decision making, right? So there are definitely, particularly in the field that I find myself most interested in, which is ethics or politics, you definitely find people publishing books, trying to guide human behavior at the highest level. Either me as an individual, I read the book and it tells me how I should live my life, or it's targeted at policymakers or decision makers or leaders. So I think that's one role that philosophers might aspire to play in society, which is kind of helping make good decisions. But I also think like if we think of philosophy as just helping people give people meaning, then and we expand our definition of who a philosopher is to say you don't have to be explicitly practicing philosophy, but you may be creating art or other expression that communicates a philosophy implicitly, or that engages people with philosophical concepts or topics or questions, then obviously I think there's plenty of that and plenty of need for that, right? Like I think there's a way in which reading a great poem or a novel or listening to a great song or an album or attending a musical performance or going to the theater or going to a gallery are all ways in which people try and make their lives meaningful, and are finding meaning. So yeah, I guess that's another function of philosophy in society.
So let's speak about traditional philosophers or people who practice philosophy. And it seems like most of their work, it involves a lot of thinking, and thinking is
Hmm.
difficult. It's hard, right? It requires a lot of energy. And do you think people are becoming lazy to think?
Wow, interesting. Hmm. Are people becoming lazy to think? I think that there's definitely more. I think it's I I think it's becoming harder to focus. Yeah, I think it's becoming harder to focus. Like even if I just compare my adolescence with what it's like to be a teenager right now, it was really easy for me to sit and read a book for a long time because I didn't have a phone. If there was a TV, like I was sharing it with other people in the house who didn't want to watch the same thing I was interested in. Even if I was interested, even if I had the TV, like I couldn't choose to watch whatever I wanted at all times, which is basically now, you can't now, there's no way to be bored, right? Like you can literally get whatever media you want at any time in whatever duration and format, right? So it's much harder to sit and engage with something difficult or something long or something that you know isn't going to capture your attention immediately. And most of the most worthwhile things in life are like that, right? Like learning a new skill or reading a long book or writing a letter. It just takes more time. And So I think people are thinking all the time. I think people are actually, in some ways, thinking more. Like, I think we are more anxious because we're constantly stimulated and constantly exhausted mentally, right? Because we're taking in all this data and all this information and all these alerts. So I don't think it's a laziness issue. I think it's really hard to focus.
I thought that people are becoming lazy to think nowadays simply because
Mm,
there's a lot of information digested for them already. So like some of them go to Instagram and
mm,
they'll read one paragraph from BBC, and it's like, well, they'll
true.
have a huge they'll assume they have a huge understanding of the matter being
Yeah.
discussed, and that's it. So
Yeah.
next time when they're having a conversation, they'll be speaking from perspective of individuals who have researched and
Yeah.
really know what they're talking about. But also focus is
Yeah.
a really important thing, and people have really lost focus, and it's really hard to concentrate nowadays given the amount of distraction that is available for us.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, I think your point is also an important one, right? Like, there's this idea in psychology, I think it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is, the true experts in a topic often feel uninformed, and people who know very little think that they know a lot. And yeah, maybe in the time before Instagram, people were just like, yeah, I don't know the news. Like, I just don't know. I haven't read a newspaper. I haven't gone to this thing. So if you ask me about what's happening in Pakistan, I'll be like, I don't know.
Mm.
Whereas now I've seen two 30 seconds clips, and I'm like, yeah, I'm totally aware of what's happening in the world. So maybe you're right. Maybe people are like getting a surface understanding of many different things, which gives them the experience or the perception that actually they know a lot and they don't need to seek more knowledge. Um, yeah, that might also be something that's happening.
Yeah, I think it is because, well, most of the times when you hear people framing their arguments, it's quite interesting because when you listen to them carefully, I mean, they don't really make sense, and yet they think they're making a lot of sense. And well,
Mm,
apparently, well, people also don't know how to argue, so that also becomes a problem, right?
sure.
Yeah, because over time it's like, well, instead of speaking with points, they now start raising their voices and becomes a hard argument.
Mm, yeah, I mean, I think that um, it's a critical skill set of being a good citizen, even just like a good person, right? Like, or at least a person who's living a fulfilling and peaceful life, to be able to listen actively and practice empathy and really seek to understand before you respond to something that you disagree with. And uh, I think you're right that, like, the ways of engagement that we have today, even though they connect us with a lot of people, maybe don't invite that kind of depth of engagement and connection with each other before we take a position. But I'm optimistic. Like, I think people care about people. So um, if we can put the right structures in place, uh, maybe we can gamify the experience of listening and building a solid argument, and maybe we can help make that turn that trend, I guess.
What is your process like of creating an argument?
Oh wow. I don't know how conscious it is. This is one of the harder things about teaching, right? Like, um there's a distinction between being experienced at something and maybe having some some ability, and then being able to convey it. And they say that one of the distinctions is actually just making your implicit ability explicit to yourself. Like, what steps did I follow? Right? Like, if you ask me, what are you doing when you read? I actually don't know. Like, it's become such a, I'm sure the same is for you, right? Like, I just look at the stuff, I look at the page and I read it. I'm not sounding out, I'm not breaking down the sentences, I'm not like asking myself exactly how the words are connected. So I wouldn't be a very good teacher of reading. With arguments, what do I know that I can do explicitly? Well, I think that if I can kind of refer to how I responded to your previous point, when I am at my best, I won't compose an argument until I feel like I understand the context really well, right? Like if I'm responding to someone, I want to make sure I understand what they've said very clearly, maybe even generously, right? Like they use these words, but what they actually mean is this. Depending on the context, I maybe want to understand why they are going in that direction, why this point seems or feels valid to them. And then let's assume I disagree. Then I probably want to start by appreciating what we have in common and what maybe I do agree with. And then making the distinction to say the place where I diverge and the reason why I diverge is here. And then for the argument itself, I guess, you want an argument to have clarity. You want it to have substance, right? Like I'm taking this position for this reason that should be clear for this belief, value, piece of evidence, whatever it is that you're grounding your position on. And then, if I believe these things, then I have to believe X, Y, and Z, following things, and kind of make the steps as explicit as possible to give people a chance to disagree with me on specific things. Yeah, that feels like a vague answer, but I hope I've responded to your question.
You say that it becomes, well, it's so natural right now and you don't even think about it. And I think the reason to that is simply because you've been practicing it long enough. So now it comes natural to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's like asking well, I'm not comparing myself to a football player. I don't necessarily feel like I'm a good argument composer necessarily. But yeah, another example that people talk about in the teaching and learning literature is, you know, um, excellent athletes can't explain to you how all the different little pieces fit together in a game that's successful. But clearly, there is something that they are practicing that's making them effective. Um, and there are plenty of people who have studied what an effective argument looks like and have written about it. And there's a whole fields of study, right, around that.
Oh, that's interesting. And I think, well, if there are, books and papers, then I think everybody needs to read them, right? Because
Hmm.
I believe that being articulate and being able to write well are some of the most important and powerful
Hmm.
tools that individuals can have that would, well, make them create good arguments and, be able to communicate effectively and share what they think with the world.
I 100% agree. Yeah, I mean, I think uh, I took only 6 philosophy courses when I was in university. I took 16 political science courses. I'm sure I learned more in my 6 philosophy classes, especially the classes where I was required to write, because I think composing something in writing, particularly composing an argument, um, maybe even especially composing an argument in an abstract domain like philosophy, and then getting feedback and editing is a habit that I think helps to clarify your thinking. Like I think if you can write clearly, it means you're thinking clearly. And if you can think clearly, then you can communicate clearly in multiple media, right? Like whether you're speaking or conveying your thoughts in another, like in art or in music or sculpture or whatever it is, or just making decisions. That's useful across whatever domain you're interested in, whether you're a coder or an agribusiness guy or a politician. Everyone should spend a little bit of time writing and writing clearly.
Yeah, everybody should spend some time writing and writing clearly. One of the things that I believe every LA student and alumni loved about graduation was actually hearing your speeches, right? And I think many people are happy about that, right? And now we're speaking about, people being articulate and being able to write well. So what's your thinking process behind when you're writing a speech, right? Like, so how do you write a speech, and how do you
Mm,
prepare yourself to deliver it in such a perfect manner that you normally do?
yeah. So it depends on I guess the gravity or the length or the importance of the event. Like it depends. Like for graduation, I start preparing a little bit earlier than I would for what I used to do on a monthly basis at assembly. Um, my ideal process is to try and like I feel I've been the most successful when I have either a theme or question that feels relevant. Okay, so um, I think for your cohort, we talked about trees. Did I get that right?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I don't remember. I didn't want to lie.
That's fine. Um, I mean, the reason was it was in COVID. I was reading a book, and the book was about kind of the forest as an organism, right? And it just helped me think, like it highlighted for me this idea of community and how community bonds enrich and help us to become more resilient. And that idea just stuck in my head. I was like, that's a cool idea, right? So it's a cool idea. I bet that if I explore it, I can have some fun and I can extract some meaning from it. So then that becomes my first note is like, what's this thing about trees as communities? And if I have a lot of time, it's just in the back of my head. And as I'm going about my life, as I'm interacting with the students, with the school, with the staff members, doing other things, I'll notice other ideas that connect to it, right? So I'll be like, oh, okay, that's kind of like this thing from COVID, or oh, that's kind of like this thing, and I'll just keep notes. And then eventually, a structure will start to emerge where I've got it. Often it's been a metaphor, and I'm using the metaphor to connect to a few important points that I want to make for the graduates, for example. Then I think the most important question at that point becomes like, what do I want to say? If I had to summarize my message into one sentence, is that sentence clear to me? Because if it's not clear to me, then I'm not going to be able to make it clear for anybody else. And then I just have fun, right? Like, so I've got like, I want to make sure I hammer this point home. I've got these different ideas that I want to connect to each other. How can I take the audience through a journey which is fun for me, fun for them, like colorful and authentic to my voice. Uh, that's the that's the process that I found myself going through.
Also, so you usually find something that interests you or a question,
Yeah,
and then you start connecting dots from events and experiences across your life, and then you start writing.
yeah, basically. So the most recent graduation speech that for the class that just graduated in June. Like I knew for a long time that I wanted to talk about the internet because I was just like I was becoming conscious of how different young Africans' experience of the internet is to when I was a teenager. And it felt like I had something to get off my chest. It was like, I'm worried, and this is why I'm worried. So that was the theme. And then like there's so many different things that I could say. So over the course of a month or whatever, it's not even every day, not every other day, but from time to time, an idea would come to mind and I'd write down a note. And then in the week before the speech, I start to compile that into a coherent um, piece of writing now.
So after having a complete piece of writing, do you usually take time to review and practice it maybe in front of the mirror or something?
You know, not enough, not enough. My dad always used to, like, I remember because I gave my graduation speech when I was graduating from high school, and I had a piece of paper, and he was like, you know, you should memorize your speeches. I was like, I don't know. So no, I probably don't do enough practice. I usually read it out loud for the first time the morning of the day that I'm going to deliver it. What's interesting about that is like sometimes you read a sentence, you're like, oh, that sounds really bad. That doesn't make sense at all. Or those two sentences next to each other are really hard to read. So then you have to edit it again. But that's probably somewhere where I could be improving.
I know you have given a lot of speeches. You have stood in front of many people for many times, but do you usually get nervous? Do you still get nervous?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think if you're not a little bit anxious, then you're probably not going to do a good job. Like we, you know, I think we paint anxiety in a negative light, and generally speaking, to have an anxious disorder, right, to be over anxious or to be unable to control or mitigate or recover from your anxiety is a problem for sure, and it's a problem that's more prevalent now than it's ever been before. But the answer is not zero anxiety. If you don't have any anxiety, if you don't have a little bit of anxiety, you're not, that's one of the things that motivates us, right? Like, I don't want to screw this up. I want to do a good job. These people deserve, they've given me half an hour of their time, and there's 200 people here, 300 people. What's 300 people times 30 minutes? That's a long time,
Yeah.
so you want to spend it well.
So you said that you read your graduation in high school and you spoke about the internet. So what type of a kid were you growing up, and would anyone think that? I mean, if I were to go to the same high school with you, would I ever think that you'd one day become interested in philosophy or become the CEO of one of the most?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, so just to clarify, I did give a speech at my graduation in high school, but when I talked about the internet, that was the most recent ALA graduation, so in 2022. Um, what kind of kid was I growing up? I was definitely a nerd. I read like my favorite pastimes were reading. I read a lot of fantasy and science fiction. I played a lot of video games, and I watched a lot of movies. Back at the time, on the weekend, you would go to the internet cafe at the mall and play Counter-Strike or StarCraft or other games where you could play against your friends. That was like my main pastime, so super nerdy. I was interested in philosophy during high school, so I think people would have predicted that. My graduation speech was about like a little bit of it was a bit dramatic, kind of like criticizing what traditional education looks like. So I don't think I did not expect to work in schools at the time, and no one I don't think in my class would have predicted that I would become a teacher or work in schools. So I think that has been an unexpected outcome.
What made you become interested in philosophy during high school?
Um, I think I'm not sure. It's kind of like a chicken or the egg kind of thing, right? I'm not sure if I'm interested in language because of the questions that philosophy wrestles with, or I'm interested in the questions that philosophy wrestles with because I enjoy language. But there's a relationship there. Like if I when I was a little kid, my mom and my dad, I would get in trouble for one word, which is why. If they ask me to do something and I say why, they'd be like, "What do you mean why? I told you to do something. This is not a matter for debate." And I would always be like, it's like 8, 9, 10-year-old me being like, no, but like just explain why. Why do you want me to do this, or why can I not do this thing? Which, I imagine you probably had a similar experience. It's like that feels to them felt insubordinate, right? Like it's disrespectful to ask your mom or your dad, why do you want me to do this thing? You must just do it, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know where that came from, but if you follow the whys long enough, you're gonna end up at something philosophical, right? Like,
Mm.
and it doesn't take that long to go from, why am I wearing a tie? I'm wearing a tie because it feels professional. Why does it feel professional? It feels professional because like ties are things that are worn more in a business environment. Why? I'm sure if you followed that long enough, you'd get to a question about how society ascribes value, or a question about um, appearance versus reality, right? Like you'd eventually get there to a question that's a philosophical question. So I guess I had a predisposition towards why.
Have you read Start with Why?
No, I haven't actually. Maybe I should start there.
Um, yeah, I think it's a really good book. I loved it. I read it and I loved it, and I think every young entrepreneur should read that book because it's gonna
Mm,
help them explore why they're starting the business they're starting, or why they're trying to solve the problems that they're trying to solve. And I
mm,
just think it's a really good book.
that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. What type of movies were you watching?
Very broad appetite. Um, you know, it's if I go to the beginning of high school, this was before we had good enough internet to be pirating lots of movies. So we would go to the video rental shop and rent videos, and it was just whatever they had. So if they had sci-fi, if they had action, if they had a rom-com, whatever was available. As our connectivity evolved, our tastes also evolved. So there was definitely a time when I was watching a lot of anime and Japanese animations, and that still has a big part in my heart. I think that's some of the most beautiful stories ever told are told in animation. And then like more documentary, indie film, art house films started becoming kind of what we were interested in. I became a big fan of Wes Anderson movies. I don't know if you've come across Wes Anderson films when I was in university. But it's been a long time actually. I can count on one hand probably the number of films I've watched in the last few years. This is part of the focus problem.
So, what do you do in your free time?
I try still to read a little bit. I try and read at night before I go to sleep, um, and on the weekend. I try and get some exercise. So I try and do yoga on a weekly basis, twice a week if I can, or go to the gym. I enjoy when I'm managing my time well, cooking meals and hosting friends for dinners. And then if yeah, if I could design my perfect week or month, then definitely spending some time in nature. I like hiking, I like being out if I can, but that just typically takes a little bit more planning.
Oh, your
Live music as well. Live music would be at the
live music. I love listening to live music, but recorded.
top. How come?
I don't like crowds. I think they draw a lot of
Okay,
energy from me, and I just can't handle it. And it's just too
interesting,
much noise and too much energy, and yeah, it's too much for me to
interesting.
take.
Okay, but you like the vibe of live music, like hearing the
Absolutely,
crowd
yeah.
reaction.
Especially reggae music and indie folk. I'm a
Cool.
huge fan of Passenger. Yeah, I love it so much.
Okay, cool.
Most of your time seems to be in reading and in writing. Should we be expecting a book from you anytime soon?
That's a great question, man. I have no plans. I haven't started writing anything of that length. I barely in
No,
my life
you have
written
fans.
anything more than
You have a
four
lot of
or five
fans.
pages. Yeah, maybe. You know what? When I get a chance to take a sabbatical and when they let me leave the space, then I'll have some time. I would love to. My dad wrote books. So I would be continuing a legacy. I think I just need to be clear on having something to say, you know. I'm not sure what I want to say yet.
If you had to write, what type of topics are you considering, or do you consider?
I the only idea that I pursued very, 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 very briefly was to write a children's book about politics.
A children books about politics. Why
Yeah,
children?
I'm attracted to the idea of writing a children's book because it's got challenges of its own, and I would love to collaborate with an illustrator. Um, and yeah, I think like we should be sparking an interest in society in young people earlier. Um, and that would just be it would be just fun to like play with that.
Well, why do you think children should be, exposed to politics at a young age? And why a book, and why for children? And why?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think like I think that whatever your whatever your station in life, wherever you were born, whatever your faith, we all seem to agree that something that makes life meaningful is engaging with other people. And we all seem to agree generally that we want the outcome of that engagement to be positive, right? The the ground rules for that engagement are determined by our political structures, like who's responsible for what and what obligations do you have to other people is determined by our politics. Um, but most of us aren't, aren't engaged in that process very critically necessarily. And I'm not saying I want people to become politicians, not by any measure, but I want people to have like high expectations of their politicians. I think it's the opposite, actually. I think that people are incentivized to choose politics as a career, and I'm not sure if politics should be a career. I think that probably we should have as politicians the people who are least eager to be decision makers. Um, so like that's the like deep, profound aspiration for society. I don't know that I can make that happen, but would I have some fun thinking about how you discuss service delivery with an 8-year-old? Yeah, it sounds like you could make some jokes and like make some rhymes and have some fun, and maybe entertain some people. Yeah.
I had a different reason as to why I would like such a book. And for me, the
Mm.
fact is that more and more young people are parting ways with politics, right? When you speak to
Mm-hmm.
people, they'll be like, well, I'm not interested in politics because, I mean, well, they always do the same things, right? Nothing is really changing, and my vote doesn't matter, and I don't see why I should be involved in politics. But in real sense, it's like no matter what field you are in, I think at the end of the day, politicians have a huge influence, massive influence compared to most people in the fields that they're in. And for me, I think that book will be a good book to inspire young people to see why they should
Mm.
play part in politics, not necessarily being politicians, but at least having an interest in politics.
Yeah. 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 I know. I think you're right. I think you're right.
Yeah. Well, we need more young people into politics. We need more people into politics.
Mm. Mm.
Well, you spoke a bit about your father and you said that he used to write books. So, did you grow up in a family in which everybody liked reading and writing books and just, you know, being curious and being intellectual?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly had the privilege of growing up in an intellectual family. Both my parents had PhDs.
Wow.
My mother was and still is. I mean, she studied as a microbiologist. She now still lectures at a women's university in Sudan, in immunology and virology. My father was he was actually business administration, human resource management was his field, and he wrote books. I must confess I haven't read any of them, which is terrible. Generally, he wrote books about management in Arabic, about crisis management, and about human resources. He also wrote about Sudan and about Sudanese culture. And yeah, so I grew up around a family where reading was valued, right? Like as kids, my parents would be willing and ready to take us to a shop where you can buy secondhand books, or to take us to a book fair or something like that. That like an activity they would invest in. Um, yeah, and I was encouraged. Like if I was seen reading a book, it was like cool. As long as your schoolwork is done, like that's a cool way to spend your time.
Oh, that's nice. And given your parents' academic achievements, did you feel pressured while growing up?
Surprisingly not. Um, I'm the youngest of three boys, so maybe they were like tired by the time I came around. They were just like, okay, whatever you do, do what you need to do. But I didn't grow up with a lot of pressure about my grades or about my achievements. Like they cared, and if I didn't do well, it would be an issue of like, okay, why? What's wrong? What's getting in your way? But I didn't. I don't remember feeling like you have to achieve academically, otherwise you're a disappointment or anything like that.
Oh, that's nice because, well,
Yeah.
because most African parents, academics and grades, they're everything. So you have to get them right,
Mm,
unless otherwise it's a different drama in the house.
yeah. Maybe I'm misremembering, but that I feel like I had that privilege.
And that's a really good privilege to have.
Mm,
I listened to one of your speech, and I think you gave it in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, and you're speaking about Energy Canyon. And when you are
mm.
writing such a topic, right? I don't think, well, you obviously stated that, you are not an individual who is into science and biology, but yet you are able to write that. So how long did it take you to research and write a topic that you're not familiar with?
Yeah, I mean, I think in that, uh, I think that I gave a specific citation at the beginning of that speech to a podcast. I think I stumbled on that idea from Radiolab, which is a podcast that I really enjoy. I enjoy science topics, and biology was my favorite subject in high school. I just didn't pursue it at university. Um, so there was this idea, and then I probably read, 3 or 4 articles and papers around that concept to kind of make sure I wrap my head around it. And I actually remember for that speech specifically, I went and talked to the head of the science department, who at the time was a biology teacher, Mr. Hans Sauder, and I was like, I need to check these 4 facts. Do I understand these 4 things accurately? And he was like, yes, yes, yes. So um, I got some external assistance to make sure I wasn't making a complete fool of myself. But I'm sure I still got some things wrong.
And so, are you interested in evolution? Because that whole speech was about evolution. So, is it a topic that
Totally.
fascinates
Yeah.
you? That's cool.
Yeah. I mean, like what an immense, fascinating topic, right? Like we have this theory to try and explain how life has come to manifest itself in all these different iterations. Um, and in some ways, like the theory is really simple and elegant. And then in other ways, it's like very confusing and incomplete. So yeah, I mean, I find it like it's the kind of topic that really tickles the brain when you learn more about it. Like I remember even like over this weekend, I was listening to something about just like the ways in which an octopus seems to demonstrate intelligence and consciousness. Um, and we're still learning more about that. Like octopuses frequently escape from aquariums. Um, and they're capable of like learning how to do simple tasks, and it's we can't really explain why, you know so it's one of those topics that makes you feel humble, and I love those topics.
I love it too, and I enjoy it so much because it helps me understand humans even. well, it helps me understand humans at a better level. A
Mm.
guy called Gad Saad, he's an evolutionary psychologist. Have you ever heard of him?
Called?
Gad Saad.
No,
Oh, you should check him out.
please.
He has some really interesting, I mean, because it seems like you're a podcast fan. He has some really
Yeah.
interesting podcasts, and he's am-
Okay.
he's amazing. And he wrote a book and tried to explain about the consumer culture and like burger,
Mm.
McDonald's, and what they teach us about, I think, human evolution and something like that.
Mm.
He's a really
Cool.
good psychologist, and he uses evolution to explain all his concepts, specifically
Mm.
explain marketing and influence, right? So
Mm.
cool guy, you should check him out. He has a couple of interesting podcasts, and I could most definitely share them with you.
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah, evolution is so fascinating. People just don't know about them.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I also think I think people are a little bit scared of the topic because it's been politicized and it has these personal implications sometimes, and it can be weaponized and has been weaponized in really dangerous ways, right? Like if it's not, it's only a couple of steps from evolution to eugenics, and to start saying like comparing races and comparing people in different parts of the world and how advanced they are, and obviously, I mean, like the science doesn't support that, but it's easy to convince people that science does. So I understand why people why it can be sensitive.
And speaking about being sensitive, it seems like nowadays everything someone says, well, apparently it's sensitive to others. And now I think people are now using um I think the statement saying that, well, what's the statement? But more of like trying to guard themselves from whatever they're saying, such that others cannot question them, right? And so
Yeah,
they answer their questions and try and formulate, arguments that make sense. And I think
yeah.
disaster.
You think? Sorry, what was the last thing you said?
I'm saying I think it's a disaster that nowadays it becomes hard
Yeah,
to people.
yeah. I mean, it's the tough topic. So on the one hand, I think it's good that we become more conscious and deliberate of the way that we communicate, and where and when our assumptions can either exclude or harm or otherwise uh, endanger the dignity and safety of someone else, right? So I think um, it's good to stop and think like, who am I speaking with? What are my assumptions that I'm operating with? What's the balance of power in the situation, and how am I, if in any way, wielding that irresponsibly? I agree, though, that there is no, if there's no discomfort, there probably isn't going to be much learning. And I know in my own personal experiences that some of the strongest things I've learned have come from moments of discomfort, or even just like moments of significant pain. Um, I think that the balance has to be struck in some degree of opting in, right? Like, okay, you come to this, let's say it's a school, it's a university, it's this institution. Here are the rules of engagement, right? Like, this is the box that we say we're holding each other accountable to. You can expect that your dignity will be protected in these ways, and then actually living up to it. Um, and then the other side of the bargain, and this is something that I've wrestled with my colleagues as educators, like to be in a conversation with someone, in particular a young person, and we're trying to arrive at an important outcome, and they say, well, this is making me feel unsafe. Um, to have the wherewithal and the confidence and the kindness to be able to respond to that by saying, like, you are safe, but we still need to have this X or Y conversation. I mean, I'm painting an extreme scenario. But I agree with you. Like, if we make our objective that no one ever is at risk of being made to feel offended or uncomfortable, or um, out of their comfort zone or stretched or whatever, then we probably aren't going to get very far.
That's for sure. there are conversations that are hard conversations, but we need to have them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So ALA has some of the most brightest students from the continent. Yeah.
Mm. I
And
hope so.
well, okay, let's
Yeah,
operate on that assumption. And
sure.
when they come to the academy, obviously they would want to show that they're smart, right? And I think as
Mm.
someone who has been in the institution for a very long time, it's like you see that, right? But they don't. And it's like, how do you deal with such individuals, right? Individuals who would come to you like and act like they're extremely smart, but
Mm.
they are not necessarily extremely smart, or at least not in some aspects. It's like, how do you have sit down and have conversations with such people without making them feel unsafe?
Oh man, I mean, like, I tend to think that life is a great teacher, and when we are prideful, then the lesson kind of has a way of coming to you. Um, I don't find like, I think that most people experience some kind of failure at ALA. And I think that's an important feature of the experience. I'm not actively looking to see like, oh, how am I going to make this person fail? I just know that like you're surrounded by a lot of peers who are also very high achieving. You're in an environment where a lot of opportunities exist. Some of the scaffolding that you're used to, whether it's from your family or from your peers or from your teachers, is not available anymore, and you're on your own. It's a new environment. It's You're just likely to stretch yourself, whether in a big way or a small way, further than your ability. um, and I think people learn for themselves, right? I definitely think a lot of people show up at new opportunities with their chest puffed up and feeling confident and feeling like they're going to teach everyone everything. And I think that the lesson usually comes to those people in its own time.
You deserve to be here. Then he deserves to be.
And here deserves you to be. Yeah.
What is the story behind that?
I don't know. It just came. You know, I it goes back maybe a little bit to what I was saying about politics before. It's specific to the ALA context, but it's also general, right? Like we're very, very fortunate to have the opportunity of being a part of this community because it's a limited opportunity and it's not available to everyone in the world, right? So the fact that it's a limited opportunity and we've gotten it um, can make us feel anxious about whether or not we should be here, right? Like a failure happens, and then I'm like, oh, I wasn't cut out for this. I'm not the person who should be here. I'm not whatever, right? And
Yeah.
so it's important, I think, at the very beginning to diffuse that kind of thinking because then you go down a spiral that you can't be rescued from. If you're here, there has to be a degree of feeling like, someone chose for me to be here and it's a good thing. And I trust the process that has brought me here. I deserve to be here, right? But I think the that's only half the puzzle. If you don't, as a result of the privilege of the opportunity, feel any responsibility, at least to the experience, right? To yourself in the experience, if not to other people, if not ultimately, I hope, towards the mission, then the bargain is not fairly struck, right? Um, you deserve to be here, but because you're here, like here also has some expectations of you. This place, this community, this mission needs you to show up, and you don't need to be the best. You don't need to win. That's not what it's about. It just you need to show up and be the best. Be yourself, right? Like be here, be present. Um, and I said that's specific to ALA, but I think it's not a far step from just describing life that way. As far as we can tell, life is a very rare experience. We haven't observed it anywhere else in the universe. So even though there's whatever 7, 8, soon to be 10 billion people on the planet, whatever the number is, right? If it's already 10, I don't know. Um, in the grand scheme of history and in the grand scope of the arc of the existence of the universe, your life is a very, very rare thing. So you should show up.
You should show up.
Hmm.
What has been one of the most challenging experiences or moments in your life?
In life,
Yeah.
sure, many. In particular, the years of the pandemic were very challenging for everyone. I would say that my years at university, particularly the 2 years in the middle, those were very difficult. I was finding it hard to motivate myself and to kind of find purpose and connection, and yeah, I was quite ungrounded.
And so how
Yeah.
did you come along to find purpose and, connection?
Uh, in a way, it started with reframing my relationship with myself. I think part of what was happening is I felt like I had squandered a big opportunity because I'd been distracted. And I think that before I could change my habits, which was really the thing that needed to happen to change the trajectory of my life, before I could change my habits, I had to care enough about myself to think that changing my habits was a worthwhile thing. And to care enough about myself to do that, I needed to forgive myself for what I thought had happened. That took about 2 years. that journey of like, I'm sad. Why am I sad? Go deeper, 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 and then come back out on the other end. I don't know. I mean, that's what it looks like. If I reflect back on it, that's the journey that I went through. I'm not sure if I had been in counseling at the time, maybe my counselor would have pointed out something else.
Oh, so you went through the process, and let's assume there's also a young person out there who might be in the process of thinking that, something in their
Mm.
life need to change or they need to get disciplined. Well, how would you suggest them to go about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that people find a peace from different sources, whether it's from faith, from their relationships with others, from I don't know, something else that they find meaningful in the world, right? But I think one of the things that like one of the I guess it's a belief, that you probably need to find an entryway to as a belief that you matter, regardless of the accidents of the fault of your birth or a mistake that you have made or a way that you are comparing yourself with other people. Then start with this like belief that you matter. Hopefully, if you have relationships around you of people who care about you, um, a thought that's been useful to me is to say like, sometimes people give you compliments or they try to encourage you or they try to say that they care about you and you're not ready to hear that. Something that kind of like a shortcut that's been useful for me is to say, well, if I don't take seriously what they're saying about me, right? If I don't value myself, even though I see other people valuing me, then in a way I'm not valuing them. If Renata says to me, Hatim, you're a really funny guy, and I'm like, I'm not really that funny, whatever it is, then it's like I don't value Renata's opinion. Same way that someone says, like, your life matters, like your presence matters, so that hopefully you can tie a few things together to be like, yeah, okay, like regardless of what's come before, there's still a future and it matters. So what do I want to do about that? And just take every day as a day, right? Like do the most you can for that day and hope that that day have a plan maybe for how that day is going to be better than the day before it. um and I think focus on the basics in terms of habits like sleep, eat, exercise, have good relationships, and a lot will follow from that.
So I'm huge on sleep. And
Mm.
how many hours of sleep do you usually get?
7
7?
nowadays.
That's nice.
Yeah, I would love to get 8,
I mean,
but I'm getting 7 usually.
I've been getting 7 for like 2 years, and I think I want to move to 8.
Yeah,
No, I think I want to. I think I want to. Because yeah, I just feel like I need more sleep, more than what I've been getting before. And well, why not?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. If you can make room for it, definitely. Yeah, I think it's the ROI is big on sleep for sure.
So when you spoke about people complimenting you and you having to think about them complimenting you and why you might want to say, well, if I say you're a funny guy, and why you might want to say, no, I'm not a funny guy. So Simon Sinek also
Mm,
spoke about compliments as a gift that people give to us. So it's like someone
mm,
thoughtful and generous enough to give you this gift. And even if you don't like it, but the fact that they
mm,
were thinking about you and they took their time to find something for you, right? And give you whatever compliment it is. If it was a gift, I mean, even if you don't like it, you'll take it, say thank you, and then go put it aside.
mm,
Yeah. So that
mm-hmm,
reminded me of
mm-hmm.
the compliment.
That's a great mental model. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So on this podcast, I have a culture of asking one last question to every guest. But since you are a writer and a reader, I think this question should be simple to you, right? What are 3 books that you read and they changed your life, or at least improved your life and made it better and gave you a better view and perception about the world?
Yeah. Great, great, great question. I mean, I'll give you my answer for today. This won't be my answer forever, but I'll just give you the answer that I can give. 3 books, right?
Yeah, 3 books.
Okay, so a book that I think uh a, a book that yeah, I mean, I think all young Africans should probably engage at some point, maybe. I don't know. It's called Season of Migration to the North. It's written by Taib Saleh, Sudanese author. It is about a young person. Uh, well, it's about our relationship with the colonial legacy and the way our life and the value of our life could be tied up to the culture and values of the former colonizer. I think I'm describing it as broadly as possible. It's a short novel. Um, it's I think got vivid imagery and color, and I think it was particularly powerful for me because it helped me understand the generation that came before me in the country that I'm from, but which I don't have a strong relationship with because I never lived there. So that's what Season of Migration to the North. Then I guess I should say something about a philosopher. So there's a contemporary author. His name is Nassim Nicholas Taleb. He's famous for
The book.
writing about statistics and finance. He's famous for The Black Swan, Fooled by Randomness, Anti-Fragile. Those are his famous books. He also published a short, small book of aphorisms, which are like small, wise sayings, called The Bed of Procrustes. I think that's a fun book. It has a lot of sentences in it that you can chew on and kind of just ponder for a while. And then a book that I haven't read recently, but I would go back and read is a long novel by um, a Russian author, Dostoevsky, called The Brothers Karamazov.
Oh, wow.
I don't know why you're laughing about that.
Because I
Yeah.
just found out about him and I have a copy of his book, The Idiot. I'm yet to
The
read.
Idiot, yeah, excellent. Yeah. Or also Crime and Punishment is one of his big ones. One
Mm.
of his famous, like, yeah, obviously. So he's like, um, I think that book is great. we used to read an excerpt from it in seminal readings at ALA called The Grand Inquisitor, which is just like a very, like, couple of maybe 20 pages conversation. But there's a lot of conversations in the book between these family members that are about how to live a good life, who you should want to be, but it's set in the context of a family that's kind of falling apart. Yeah, and it's a beautiful, powerful, difficult read. Those would be my three books.
And all of them are novels.
And no, the better procrasti is just short philosophical sayings.
Oh, philosophy.
It's non the middle one.
There's also a guy called Lex Fridman who is really
Hmm.
fascinated by those. How do you pronounce his name, by the way? I still haven't gotten a hang of it.
Dostoevsky.
Dostoevsky. I'll still have to practice.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he's the guy who admires him a lot, and well, he's also a podcaster, right? And a lot of
Mm.
his thinking is influenced by him. And
Mhm.
I was really excited to start reading the books that he wrote. And I mean, I can't wait. I think after I read them, I'll probably let you know, and maybe we can have a discussion about it.
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to. You're inspiring me to go back and read more. Yeah, I think one of his books, Crime and Punishment, is one of only two books in my life that are giving me nightmares, just because of how he can really get into the, or he did at the time, like he just really got into the human psyche in a way that's compelling.
Human psyche. Have you read Kalyang before?
Mm-mm.
At all?
Kellyanne?
Yeah, no, Kalyang.
Carl Jung. No, I
But you
haven't read any Carl Jung. I should.
I think you should. I think you should. He wrote a great deal about the human psyche and
Yeah,
confronting the dark side, and I think it's
yeah,
a topic that is really fascinating to read about and learn.
yeah. He
Yeah,
writes about like the shadow self.
yeah. He's the guy.
Yeah,
Yeah, the shadow
okay.
self and how
And the
to confront
archetypes.
it and archetypes. Yeah, he's. I think he's also regarded as the father of psychoanalytics.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure,
yeah.
sure, sure.
Oh, I mean, thank you for the book recommendations. I'll definitely be jumping into them too. I mean, I have to read them because I
Great.
believe that books influence people greatly, like great deal.
Mm,
And when you read books, you don't only read 300 or 200 pages, but you read someone's life experience, right? So this is like 50 years of
mm,
their life,
mm,
summarized in a book. So that's powerful. And I think that's a way to learn about most things and, help you avoid a lot of, mistakes that you might have otherwise made. So it's like, well, people made mistakes for you. So, just learn from them.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Thank you very
100%.
much. I mean, I really enjoyed this conversation.
So did I, Renat. This is the best part of my week so far. I'm glad that you followed up, and I'm glad that we found the time.